The first comic book I read was Legion of Superheroes. It was an American comic that my father brought back from his college where he worked, and then about 67, 68 DC Comics and Marvel Comics were being reprinted in black and white in comics like Pow, Wham, Smash, Terrific, and that's when I really got inspired by Batman and Robin, and never really looked back since then.
I think I was about 8 or 9 when my brother had copies of 2000 AD lying around. So I remember reading 2000 AD from probably 80, 81. And then my parents were quite happy to buy me copies of Whizzer and Chips and Beano and stuff like that. It was 2000 AD and Battle that my brother had, which was much more interesting.
I was looking for humorous books to read, any comedy books. I just finished with Douglas Adams and I was looking in the library. And I kind of stumbled upon Preacher, which is not the first comic you really will never start reading, but I kind of got into that. Never really seen anything like it before.
What I would say is the first one that I read, and this is going way, way back into the 1960s, the first one that had a real impact on me was TV Century 21. Suddenly you had all these science fiction stories in a comic form for kids. This is after the time of the Eagle and everything else. But you had very dynamic stories, and it was all bright and it was all in colour, and it was stunning.
I mean, I'm limited by how much they cost. They can be quite expensive. I don't buy them every single month because it drives me insane to just have one little bit at a time. I prefer to get the whole thing, trade paperbacks. But they cost about 15, some of them 20 quid these days. So I kind of have to space out which ones I get a little bit. The library has proven very useful.
I moved to Colchester in 1977 and there was nowhere in the town to buy any comics, and it then occurred to me, why didn't I try and open a small shop selling comics? And I just then set about finding how I could import the comics and set up a shop, which I did in 1981.
As a comic book collector, I'm actually quite well versed in some of the kind of more obscure comic books, and they don't get released as easily as something like Spider-Man or Batman comics, which are very regular. There are many titles of each of those characters. So trying to find a copy of Supergod might mean that you have to wait 6 months to a year to get 5 issues out sporadically. So there's a lot of patience involved.
Well, I was pretty lucky in that I knew people who wrote. They were passing around a lot of things, so I didn't actually have to buy a lot. There was a lot that everybody was circulating, which was useful.
I've got several 100,000 comics here, not all different, but I suppose I've got about 30,000 different individual comics here, and then I had multiple copies of some.
Obviously I didn't own my brother's comics, which is a pity, so when I started buying 2000 AD, probably a couple of years later, I had in excess of say 400 issues, and then come 1985, 86, I came across American comics. I started buying Justice League because there was a hip-hop character in it, and that went on from then till the early 90s. Came across Ace Comics around about the same time, and basically used to spend my teenage years stood in there on a Saturday talking nonsense about American independence and British independent comics.
Don't own as many as I used to. I've read, it's really difficult for me to say, I've read Transmetropolitan, Sandman, Preacher, Lucifer, there are loads of others, Planetary. I would say quite a few. I can't possibly put my hands on it.
I bought various things over the years. What I really regret, and this is something that I think is true of all blokes when they get older, is when you're young, you buy stuff. And there comes a point when you think, I really ought to be older now, and you get embarrassed and you sell it or you give it away or whatever. And about 10 to 15 years later, you turn around and think, I really wish I hadn't done that.